My daughter and her husband moved in to take care of me after my surgery. In reality, they were trapping me in my own home to steal everything I had. They cut me off from my friends, took my phone, and tricked me into signing documents that gave them total control. They treated me like I was already dead, just a problem to be managed. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot that for 40 years I was the most respected nurse in Boston, and I was about to use every connection I had to deliver a lesson in respect they would never forget. It's a funny thing, recovery. You spend your whole life on your feet, 40 years as a nurse navigating the polished chaos of Boston's best hospitals, and then one new knee puts you in a wheelchair in your own living room, feeling like a piece of antique furniture someone just dusted off for a party. And they were having a party of sorts. My daughter Melissa and her husband Derek had invited a few of their colleagues over. They called it a get well gathering, but it felt more like they were showing off their latest acquisition, the dutifully cared for mother. My brownstone was pristine as always, but it felt different with them in it. They'd moved in to help me post-op, and their presence filled the space in a way my late husband Frank never had. His presence was a comfortable warmth. Theirs was a hum of anxious energy. I sat there propped up with pillows Melissa fluffed every 10 minutes and watched them work the room. They were both accomplished medical specialists, the kind of power couple Boston adores, and they wore their success like a second skin. But a nurse sees things. You learn to read the signs that have nothing to do with a patient's chart. I saw the way Melissa's smile was just a little too bright, a little too tight at the corners. It was the same smile she used when a patient's family was asking difficult questions. And I saw Derek, who was holding forth about some new surgical technique, constantly flicking his eyes toward his phone, which he held tightly in his left hand. It was a subtle, jittery gesture, the kind you see in an intern who's terrified of being called out by the chief resident. They were performing, and their audience wasn't just their colleagues. It was me. Their attentiveness felt like a weight, a suffocating blanket of care that wasn't meant to warm me, but to hold me in place. In the days that followed the party, that blanket got heavier. Their management of my recovery began in earnest. It started with my friends. Margaret, who I'd been chief night nurse with for 20 years, would call, and Melissa would answer with a syrupy sweetness, telling me later that she'd told Margaret I was resting and shouldn't be disturbed. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who has brought me soup every winter since Frank passed, was politely but firmly turned away at the door. Melissa explained it was to protect me from germs, but it felt more like she was guarding a vault. Then came the technology. My tablet, my window to the world, to my banking, my emails with old friends. The news vanished one afternoon. In its place was a clunky white device they called a senior-friendly tablet. It had 3 large buttons, video calls, photos, and weather. There was no internet browser. Derek explained with a condescending pat on my hand that they were worried about me falling for online scams. Me. Helen O'Brien, who once managed the budgets for an entire hospital wing and could spot a padded expense report from 50 feet away. I was being treated like a child. And the worst part was the chilling efficiency of it all. They weren't just helping. They were systematically cutting my lines of communication. They were isolating me all under the guise of love. The real betrayal, though, came about a week later. It was a Tuesday. I remember because my physical therapy session had been particularly brutal. The therapist, a young man full of relentless optimism, had pushed me hard, and I was utterly exhausted. The pain in my knee was a deep, throbbing ache that radiated up my entire leg. I was sitting in my armchair just wanting to close my eyes when Derek came in with a thick manila folder and a pen. He told me it was just some routine paperwork from the hospital and the insurance company. Post-op administrative stuff, he said, waving his hand dismissively. He put the folder in my lap and started flipping through the pages, pointing to the little yellow "Sign Here" stickies. "Just a few signatures, Helen. and we'll be all done with this nonsense," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. I was too tired to argue, too tired to even read the dense blocks of text. I saw words like authorization and release, and they seemed normal enough. I trusted them. He was a doctor, and she was my daughter, so I signed. I scrawled my name on 5, maybe 6 pages, my hand feeling heavy and clumsy. He took the folder, gave me another one of those empty professional smiles, and left the room. I closed my eyes and drifted into a pained sleep, feeling a vague sense of relief that at least the paperwork was done. That night, the pain wouldn't let me rest. It was a sharp, insistent throbbing that no amount of repositioning could soothe. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up maneuvering myself into my wheelchair to go to the kitchen for a fresh ice pack. The old house was completely dark and silent, the kind of deep quiet that holds every small sound. As I wheeled down the hallway, I heard it. A voice. It was Derek in his study, speaking in a hushed, frantic whisper. I stopped my wheels silent on the antique runner. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but his tone was so sharp, so full of a raw panic I had never heard from him before, that it froze me in place. I couldn't make out all of it, just fragments cutting through the silence. Another margin call. The words meant little to me, some kind of financial term, but the terror in his voice was unmistakable. Can't liquidate the real estate that fast. My heart started to beat a little faster. Real estate. My house was the only real estate we had. Then came the line that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. It was clear and sharp and aimed right at my life. We have control now, but we need another 60 days before the quarterly statements get mailed out. Don't worry, she won't see a thing. I just sat there in the darkness of the hallway, the polished wood of the wheelchair cool beneath my hands. The throbbing in my knee was gone, replaced by a cold, spreading dread. In that single, horrifying moment, everything clicked into place. The performative smiles, the intercepted phone calls, the confiscated tablet, the thick stack of routine papers I had so trustingly signed. It wasn't care. It was a coup. The documents weren't for my protection. They were a weapon, and it was aimed directly at me. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. After I wheeled myself back to my room, I just sat by the window, watching the streetlights of Boston cast long shadows on the walls. The horror I'd felt in the hallway slowly receded, replaced by something else, something cold and familiar. It was the focus that takes over a nurse during a code blue. Panic is a luxury you can't afford when a life is on the line. You assess, you diagnose, and you act. The patient in this case was my life, and my children were the disease. The next morning, I let them see what they expected to see. I was quiet, a little withdrawn, and I made sure to move slowly, as if the night's pain had taken its toll. Melissa fussed over my breakfast, cutting my toast into perfect little squares. Derek hid behind the financial section of the newspaper, but I could see he wasn't really reading. His eyes were scanning the same paragraph over and over. They were nervous. Good. I needed them nervous. My plan was simple. I would make a small incision to see how badly they would bleed. I waited for the right moment. After breakfast, Melissa went into the kitchen to take a call, her voice a low professional murmur. Derek was clearing the table, his movements jerky. This was my chance. I looked at him, forcing a warm, slightly fragile smile onto my face. I told him that it was funny the things you think about when you have too much time on your hands. I'd been thinking about my old Nightingale fund. I asked him, my voice full of innocent curiosity, if he thought it was still performing well, what with the market being so unpredictable. I added that it always had such a wonderful dividend payout around this time of year. I chose that fund for a very specific reason. It wasn't with some massive brokerage firm they could easily lie about. It was managed by a small local Boston firm founded by a doctor's widow decades ago. A lie about it would have to be specific, and it would have to be invented on the spot. The question hit him like a physical blow. All the color drained from his face. He started stammering, his hands fumbling with the plates. He said something about portfolio rebalancing and the need for diversification strategies in a volatile climate. It was a word salad of financial jargon, meaning absolutely nothing. Just then, Melissa came back into the room, a questioning look on her face. Hearing the topic, she immediately jumped in, trying to take control. She explained with that same forced brightness that they had decided to move some of my assets into more stable long-term care bonds for my security. And there it was. His story was about market strategy. Her story was about my personal care. They contradicted each other completely, their panicked lies tumbling out one on top of the other in a rush to cover a truth they couldn't name. In that moment, their guilt wasn't just a suspicion. It was a screaming siren in the quiet of my dining room. That afternoon, I got my window. Melissa had a telehealth conference she had to take in her room, and Derek, looking even more stressed after the breakfast interrogation, announced he had to run an urgent errand. I knew that errand was likely a desperate attempt to shore up whatever financial disaster he was drowning in. For the first time in days, I was completely alone in the house. I wheeled myself over to the living room where they'd left the senior-friendly tablet on the end table. It was a pathetic, infantilizing piece of technology, but it had one function: they'd overlooked a basic phone dialer. My fingers felt clumsy on the screen, but my memory was as sharp as ever. There are some numbers you never forget. I dialed the private cell phone number of Dr. Anya Sharma. I had mentored Anya 40 years ago when she was a terrified but brilliant surgical intern. Now she was on the board of the hospital. She answered on the second ring. I kept my voice low and steady. I told her my name, and then I said I needed a consultation. She sounded concerned, asking what was wrong. I chose my words carefully, using a language she would understand. I told her it was about a case of failure to thrive. After a short pause, I added, mine. I told her I was at the house and that she needed to be discreet. There was another pause on the line, and then her voice came back all business. She understood. I had my first ally. My brief moment of victory didn't last long. When Melissa and Derek returned later that day, the atmosphere in the house had changed. The cloying, suffocating care was gone, replaced by a cold, oppressive authority. They sat me down together, their faces grim masks of professional concern. Melissa did the talking. She said my question at breakfast and my general agitation was concerning them. She said they had spoken with my doctor, a lie I was sure, and he had recommended that I minimize all forms of stress. And then Derek reached down and picked up the tablet from the table beside me. He told me that for my own peace of mind, they would be holding on to it and my phone for a little while, just until I was feeling more like myself. He said it with a finality that left no room for argument. I watched him unplug the device and place it on a high bookshelf I couldn't possibly reach. In that moment, I realized the gilded cage they had built around me had just become a real prison. My timeline for getting out had just been cut dangerously short. When a predator thinks it has cornered its prey, the most dangerous thing the prey can do is play dead. That's what I did. The day after they took my phone, the fight seemed to go out of me. I became what they wanted me to be, a frail, confused old woman. I told Melissa that the stress of our little disagreement had caused a flare-up of pain and made my head feel fuzzy. The lie came easily. After 40 years of listening to patients, I knew exactly what symptoms to describe. It worked better than I could have hoped. A wave of relief washed over them. Their mother wasn't a threat. She was a patient just like any other. They believed my brief spark of defiance was a one-time event, a final flicker before the flame went out. Melissa started cooing over me again, helping me with my medications, watching me swallow each pill as if I might forget how. I spent long hours in my armchair, my eyes closed, appearing to doze. And they relaxed. Their conversations in the next room became less hushed. Their guard was down. They thought they had won. In those long, quiet hours of pretending to sleep, my mind was sharper than ever. I was piecing together the puzzle. What kind of financial disaster makes two successful doctors so desperate they would defraud their own mother? It had to be something tied to their pride. I thought about the culture they lived in, that competitive world of Boston specialists, where success is measured in publications, new cars, and exotic vacations. I pictured them at a medical conference, surrounded by their peers, all talking about their investments. And then I pictured a man, someone charismatic and smooth, pitching an exclusive opportunity. Something in biotech, probably. Something that promised impossible returns, and more importantly, confirmed their status as savvy insiders. I could see them in their car, the masks stripped away, the panic they hid from me finally on full display. I imagined them getting the email, the one that said the fund had collapsed, that it was all a lie, a massive Ponzi scheme. They hadn't just lost money, they had been made to look like fools. They were ruined, and the shame of it was so profound, so terrifying, that it twisted them into the people they were now. People who would steal from a sick old woman to keep the illusion of their perfect lives from shattering. While I played the part of the fading matriarch, I was secretly preparing for war. During one of my long naps, when Melissa was at the grocery store and Derek was in his study, I wheeled myself silently into my walk-in closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of old photo albums, was a floral hat box. Inside was my pre-digital life. I lifted the lid, the faint scent of lavender and old paper filling the air. There it was, my old leather address book. Its pages were filled with names and numbers written in my own hand, a testament to a lifetime of relationships built on trust, not text messages. The private cell phone numbers of Boston's medical elite. Surgeons, hospital administrators, board members. People who remembered me not as a frail old woman, but as Nightingale, the nurse who ran the tightest ship in the city. I sat there in the quiet of my closet, methodically turning the pages, planning my offensive. Deep in the closet, I also felt for an old nursing cape from my early days. Tucked into a secret pocket sewn into the lining was just what I remembered, a spare key to the house and a small roll of emergency cash. My escape plan was coming together. The arrogance of a cornered animal who thinks it's safe is a dangerous thing. Derek, believing I was now completely docile and sinking into dementia, grew careless. A few days later, he was on the phone in the dining room speaking to their lawyer. His voice was confident, dismissive. He was talking about expediting the process, about my obvious cognitive decline, making things straightforward. He was so wrapped up in his victory that he left his briefcase on the dining room table wide open. I was wheeling myself toward the kitchen, pretending I needed a glass of water. My path took me right past the table. I didn't even have to stop. My eyes, trained to scan medical charts for the smallest inconsistencies, took in the top page in a single glance. It was a preliminary draft of a petition for conservatorship. My name was at the top. Below it was a list of fabricated anecdotes, twisted half-truths, detailing my supposed memory lapses, erratic behavior, and inability to manage my own affairs. It was all there, their entire legal strategy, a blueprint of lies designed to strip me of my life. He hadn't just gotten careless. He had handed me their playbook. I spent the next 2 days in a state of strange, suspended calm. I played my part beautifully. I was the docile, slightly confused mother they wanted to see. I let Melissa help me with my walker. I ate what she put in front of me, and I spent hours in my chair by the window appearing to watch the world go by. But I wasn't watching the world. I was waiting. I had set a plan in motion with my call to Anya, and I had a nurse's patience. I knew how to wait for a fever to break. It broke on a Thursday afternoon. The doorbell rang, a sharp, authoritative sound that was different from the gentle chime of a delivery or a neighbor. Melissa went to answer it, a slightly annoyed look on her face. I heard her voice from the foyer, a confused stammer. A moment later, she backed into the living room, followed by two people who immediately changed the entire atmosphere of the house. The first was Dr. Anya Sharma. She was exactly as I remembered, only more so. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her posture was impeccable. Her expression, one of calm, professional concern. 40 years ago, she had been a terrified intern under my wing. Today, she was one of the most respected surgeons in Boston and a powerhouse on the hospital board. Beside her was a man I didn't know, but I recognized his type instantly. He was older, with silver hair and the kind of quiet, unshakable confidence that only comes from decades of winning in a courtroom. Melissa and Derek, who had come running from his study, stood frozen. Their carefully controlled environment had been breached. Anya stepped forward, her voice smooth and clear. She explained that she was just stopping by for a wellness check on a revered former colleague. Before Melissa could formulate a response, the man stepped forward and introduced himself as David Chen, an attorney. He stated, his tone polite but firm, that he was here to discuss some legal documents I had recently signed. The trap had been sprung. They ushered us all into the living room. I remained in my wheelchair, a silent observer. Melissa and Derek sat together on the sofa, a visible gap between them, their bodies rigid with panic. Mr. Chen began calmly, his questions precise and disarming. He asked them about my recovery, about the care they were providing. Then he gently pivoted to the power of attorney. He wondered about its timing, coming so soon after a major surgery. He asked about the necessity of such a comprehensive document. Derek tried to take the lead, puffing himself up with medical jargon about post-operative cognitive vulnerabilities and the need for proactive asset management. He was trying to frame their actions as responsible, prudent. But Mr. Chen didn't challenge him. He just listened, nodding thoughtfully, letting Derek talk himself into a corner. When Derek finally ran out of steam, Mr. Chen reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He didn't make a show of it. He simply placed it on the coffee table. He explained that it was a printout from a financial tracking service. It showed a significant transfer, a very large sum of money from my Nightingale fund to an unknown LLC. The date of the transfer was just 2 days after I had signed the power of attorney. That single piece of paper did what no argument could. It shattered their composure completely. It was Melissa who broke first. A terrible, ragged sob escaped her lips. And then it all came pouring out. She confessed everything, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic, desperate torrent. She told us about the charismatic wealth manager, the exclusive biotech fund, the seduction of outsized returns, the crippling fear of being left behind by their peers. She described the horrifying email that revealed it was all a Ponzi scheme the moment they realized they had lost everything, their savings, their future everything. She talked about the crushing shame, the terror of their meticulously crafted world, collapsing, the professional and social oblivion they were facing. It was a full, complete, and pathetic confession of desperation. I watched my daughter break down, and I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound clinical sadness. The diagnosis was clear, a terminal case of fear and pride. Derek, however, reacted not with remorse, but with fury. He turned on Melissa, his face a mask of rage. He was furious not because of what they had done, but because she had confessed. He started shouting, trying to shift the blame, claiming he had been against the idea from the start, that he was only trying to protect the family from her bad decisions and her panic. Their united front didn't just fracture, it exploded. They were two drowning people clawing at each other to stay afloat, exposing the bitter, rotten core of their partnership for all to see. I let them burn themselves out. When their angry, panicked recriminations finally faded into choked silence, I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but in that silent, wrecked room it cut through the air like a scalpel. I had been silent until now, the frail patient in the corner. But the woman who spoke was not a patient. She was the head nurse of Boston General. I told them that the document they had me sign was void. I explained that I had already met with Mr. Chen earlier in the week, using the spare key I kept hidden in my old nursing cape, and had signed a full revocation. Their faces went slack with shock. They had been so focused on controlling my present that they never considered I had a past they couldn't touch. Then I looked directly at Derek. I told him that I was aware he had initiated a legal process for conservatorship, a process based on my supposed cognitive decline. And I informed him that we would see it through. They had started a war, and I was going to let them fight it. I dictated the terms right then and there. They would meet us in court. They were left powerless, trapped in the very legal mechanism they had created to destroy me. The terror on their faces was a new kind. It was no longer the fear of financial ruin. It was the fear of a public reckoning they knew with absolute certainty they could not survive. A probate court is a cold, sterile place designed to strip emotion away from matters of life and death. But on that day, the air in that Boston courtroom was thick with it. I sat beside Mr. Chen at our table, my hands resting on the handles of my wheelchair. I wasn't nervous. I felt a profound and somber sense of purpose. This was not just a legal proceeding, it was a surgery, a careful and precise excision of a cancer that had grown in my family. I looked at the gallery behind us. It was full. Melissa and Derek's entire world was there, drawn by the irresistible pull of courtroom gossip involving two of their own. Chiefs of surgery, hospital administrators, donors, whose names were on entire hospital wings. They had all come to watch the spectacle. And at the petitioner's table, my children looked small and pale, consumed by the world they had so desperately wanted to impress. Their lawyer, a man who looked as slick and unsubstantial as his case began. He painted a pathetic picture of a beloved mother succumbing to the fog of old age. He used the very lies I had read in Derek's briefcase, twisting my moments of post-surgical fatigue into a narrative of profound cognitive decline. He spoke of my forgetfulness, my erratic behavior, my vulnerability. He portrayed Melissa and Derek as two heartbroken children forced into this difficult position out of sheer loving concern for my well-being. It was a masterful performance of fiction. I listened to the story of this frail, confused woman he was describing, and I did not recognize her at all. When he was finished, a hush fell over the room. The judge looked at my lawyer. Mr. Chen rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He didn't begin with a fiery rebuttal. He began by calling his first witness. He called the head of physical therapy from my former hospital, a kind bear of a man named Michael, who had personally overseen my recovery exercises. Michael spoke warmly about my determination and my sharp mind during our sessions. He described how I would correctly identify the muscle groups we were working on and discuss the finer points of my own recovery plan. Then Mr. Chen asked him if he had had any other contact with my family. Michael's expression tightened. He recounted an unusual and ethically questionable phone call he had received from Derek. He described how Derek had fished for negative information, asking leading questions about any moments of confusion or lapses in memory I might have had. You could feel the shock ripple through the gallery. A doctor trying to solicit fabricated evidence against his own mother-in-law. It was the first cut, clean and deep. After that, the bleeding didn't stop. Mr. Chen orchestrated not just a rebuttal, but a systematic restoration of my life's work. He called a parade of unimpeachable witnesses the ghosts of my children's ambition. Dr. Anya Sharma took the stand, her voice ringing with authority as she spoke of my mentorship of the nights I had guided her through complex procedures when she was a young resident. She was followed by two other respected surgeons, one of whom told a story of how my quick diagnostic eye had once caught a mistake on a chart that saved a patient's life. A hospital board member I had served with testified to my sharp financial oversight and unwavering integrity. With each witness, the hushed whispers in the gallery grew louder. The narrative was being rewritten. I was not a confused old woman. I was the Nightingale, a pillar of their community, a legend in the world they so desperately wanted to conquer. The judgment wasn't coming from the bench. It was coming from the shocked and disapproving faces of their peers. The true punishment was being administered right there in real time, the instant catastrophic destruction of their professional reputations. Their careers were over. They just didn't know it yet. The final witness, a forensic accountant, took the stand and calmly detailed the fraudulent transfers, the liquidation of my assets, and the shell LLC created to hide the money. The whispers in the courtroom stopped. There was only silence. The judge, a woman with intelligent eyes, looked from the accountant's report to my children. Her expression was one of utter disbelief mixed with a clear, cold anger at the audacity of their petition. She looked at Mr. Chen, who rose one last time to deliver the consequences. His voice was devoid of emotion, a simple recitation of facts. He stated that given the evidence we requested, the petition for conservatorship be dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. He informed the court that a civil suit had already been filed to reclaim every penny of the stolen funds. And finally, he announced that formal complaints complete with witness testimony and financial records had been submitted to the state medical board, citing multiple ethical violations. It wasn't cruel. It was precise. It was just. Each consequence was an inescapable mathematical result of their own actions. The justice was delivered not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a diagnosis. They had built their lives on the sandy foundation of professional reputation, and in one afternoon in the forum, they valued above all else, I had simply washed it all away. After the judge's final words, the silence in the courtroom was a heavy, suffocating thing. I didn't stay to watch my children crumble. Mr. Chen and Anya escorted me out, shielding me from the swarm of whispers and shocked stares. When I returned to my brownstone, the quiet was different. It was no longer the oppressive silence of a prison. It was the clean, empty silence of a room that has been swept clean after a terrible fever. Melissa and Derek were gone. They had packed their things and left while I was in court, leaving behind nothing but the faint, cloying scent of Melissa's perfume. I didn't have to wonder about the immediate aftermath. My network, the one they had so foolishly underestimated, brought me the news in quiet, respectful updates. Anya told me during one of our weekly lunches. Melissa and Derek had become professionally radioactive overnight. The story of the hearing spread through Boston's medical community like a virus. Colleagues who had once vied for their attention now wouldn't even make eye contact. Calls went unreturned. Both were asked to take an indefinite leave of absence from their hospital positions, a polite, corporate term for a career execution. The financial ruin they had fought so desperately to hide was now the lead story in the hospital gossip mill, a cautionary tale whispered over coffee in the doctor's lounge. Their carefully constructed world had not just cracked, it had been vaporized. Their marriage, a partnership built on ambition and image, couldn't survive the blast. Anya told me about it a few weeks later. Derek, consumed by a bitter, bottomless rage, blamed Melissa for everything, for her bad decisions, for her emotional collapse in my living room, for her failure to be a better liar. He couldn't face the wreckage of his own making, so he did what cowards do. He ran. He resigned from his position, put their house up for a fire sale, and left Boston seeking anonymity somewhere out west, where his name meant nothing. Melissa was left with nothing. No husband, no career, no status, and a mountain of legal fees from the civil suit. Stripped of everything she had used to define herself, she was forced to look at the one person she had been avoiding her whole life herself. Anya heard through a colleague that she had started therapy, beginning the slow, painful work of understanding the profound depth of her failure, not just as a professional, but as a daughter. It was not a happy ending for her, but it was perhaps the beginning of a real one. As for me, I began to thrive. My life, which had shrunk to the four walls of my living room, expanded again. The physical therapy, which had once been a grueling chore, became a symbol of my progress. Soon the wheelchair was replaced by a walker, and the walker was replaced by a cane. And one beautiful spring morning, I walked out of my front door with nothing but my handbag, and I headed for the Boston Public Garden. I reconnected with my friends. Margaret and I started our weekly card games again. Mrs. Gable came over for tea, no longer needing to be secretive about it. I answered my own phone. I read my own mail. These small, simple acts of autonomy felt like the grandest of luxuries. With Mr. Chen's help, I used the recovered funds for a new purpose. The money they had tried to steal, the money that had been tainted by their fear and greed, was transformed. I established the Nightingale Grant, a perpetual scholarship for promising nursing students from low-income backgrounds. It was my way of ensuring that my legacy wouldn't be defined by my children's betrayal, but by the work I had dedicated my life to. The money was no longer a source of conflict. It was a source of care, a way to ensure the next generation of Nightingales would have the support they needed. Months passed. The seasons turned. Summer faded into a crisp Boston autumn. One afternoon, I was sitting in my sunlit living room reading a book when the mail arrived. In it was a small plain envelope with my name written in Melissa's familiar, elegant script. I opened it. The note inside was short, just a few lines. It was an awkward, stilted apology, the words of someone who is still learning the language of remorse. It wasn't a grand gesture, and it didn't erase anything that had happened. I put the letter down on the table beside me. I didn't feel a surge of anger, nor did I feel a rush of forgiveness. What I felt was a quiet, peaceful, and detached understanding. I looked out the window at the bustling street, at the life of the city that was once again mine to be a part of. I was no longer a prisoner in my own home. I was the matriarch of my own life, secure in the knowledge that I had built something of true value. Something my children, in their desperate pursuit of a lesser treasure, had never been capable of understanding. My peace was my ultimate victory. In the end, Helen's story teaches a powerful lesson about true worth. Her children, blinded by the frantic shame of their financial failure, tried to seize her assets. They failed to understand that her greatest treasure wasn't her money, but the 40 years of respect, loyalty, and integrity she had carefully built. Their ambition was loud and fragile, while her strength was quiet and unbreakable. Her victory wasn't just in winning a legal battle, but in proving that a legacy forged in character is the one fortune that can never be diminished or stolen.